Hi, welcome back. As we said before, voluntary action is a necessary condition for moral action, but it can't be enough to say that we've acted morally or admirably. And that is because you could act voluntarily but still have no choice. As we said before, choice is voluntary, but not all voluntary action is something you do by choice. And that is because, as Aristotle says, animals act voluntarily, and so do very young children, but we don't hold them responsible for their actions. We don't punish them or blame them. We might in a non-thinking moment, but when we think about it, we realize we can't hold a dog responsible for biting someone. That's what they want to do, but it's not something they have a choice in doing. It's a result of impulse, you might say. We hold the owner responsible for not keeping the dog under control. And so for Aristotle, the reason why voluntary action is not a choice is because many times we act voluntarily on the spur of the moment, or impulse, as we might say, as I wrote here. So this could be the result of some external influence. So you can imagine, for example, that you're in a crowd and that crowd is spurred up by a demagogue, a great speaker, and then you are caught up in the moment and in the crowd, and the crowd goes and does something which you do willingly. You voluntarily do. You're not doing this against your will, but yet you're caught up in this mob mentality. So therefore, what you did is not a product of choice, but rather a product of impulse or external influence, even though you did it because you wanted to do it. So just because you want to do something and you know what you're doing doesn't mean that you have done it by choice. And it is choice that is required to say, oh, what you did was truly you who did it. You decided, you thought about it, and then you went about doing it. So then what is choice? Well, if we look at the original Greek word for choice, it's the word praeidosis. And praeidosis consists of two parts. Pra means beforehand. So now that's important, because what this means is this is the type of action that involves a process that occurs before you actually act. Now, what is that process that's going on before you actually act, before the moment in which you're spurred to action? And that is this eidosis, which literally means selection out of alternatives. So you can imagine something like this. You're presented with a bunch of different desserts on a cart and in a restaurant. And as you're looking at these things, you then choose one of the desserts, knowing all the alternatives. So, thus, choice, according to Aristotle, is a choosing from various alternatives beforehand. Now, obviously, something like that requires reason, and thus animals can't do this, and children, when they're very young, can't do this and need to grow up and get the use of their reason before they can do this very well. So why does this require a reason? Well, because it requires that you can visualize the future. So again, let us say that you're choosing a career. What are you doing? Well, you visualize the various things that you could do. You look at your own talents and you say, well, I'm very good at math, but I'm not very good at writing. I'm very good at planning, but I'm not very good at going with the flow. What kinds of careers fit my talents best? Also, what do I like to do? Yes, I'm very good at math, but I hate doing it. So, thus, a span of things that you could do opens up, like a future with various alternatives. At the point that you're considering these, none of these are predetermined. In fact, by your very consideration of what you're going to do beforehand, you thereby open up various futures for yourselves, and therefore open up the possibility that you could do other than what you actually do. And this is the source of responsibility, because you could have done this rather than what you did, then we can say what you did was determined by you and not by anything else. And so, thus this beforehand, this thinking through beforehand, you notice thinking, it is thinking, Aristotle says, it is logic, because you have to understand general principles. You have to understand, because you're not seeing it happen, what happens when you have a certain talent? What does that imply? What happens when you go into a certain situation, like into a cage with a tiger? You have to know something about tigers to then be able to visualize the future of going into that cage with the tigers. Tigers are not tame creatures. Therefore, what I need to do is be careful and various things like that. And so therefore, the very process of thinking beforehand and choosing beforehand from various alternatives requires self-conscious, rational thought. Now, does that mean that therefore everything you do when you choose is rational? No, it just means you have the ability to do this. It might be that you don't do this very well, or that you skew the alternatives because you already want to choose something else. And so all that proeidosis means is that you visualize beforehand your various courses of action, and then you select from these alternatives what you're going to do. So that's the process, but what actually is it? That's our next question for Aristotle. Well, he thinks, again, distinguishing it from things that it is not will help us. So first of all, it is not a desire. This is crucial, because many people believe that your choice just involves a bunch of different desires that you have, and that, say, for example, I desire to eat dessert, but I also desire to be healthy. And these two desires are in conflict with each other. If I desire to be healthy and lose some weight, then I cannot eat that coconut cream pie. But I really desire the coconut cream pie. And the average person then visualizes the process of selection as a battle between these two desires. And the desire that's stronger wins out, and I therefore eat the coconut cream pie. But you know that can't be true. You know this because you've all made New Year's resolutions, haven't you? For example, my New Year's resolution might be, I'm not going to eat desserts anymore between Monday and Saturday. I'm only going to allow myself to have that coconut cream pie on Sunday. Well, we all know that with New Year's resolutions, we make them, and then what do? We break them. So Aristotle says this shows a sort of weakness of the will, which he calls incontinence. Now, the modern use of the word incontinence has to do with lack of bowel control, but the Old English meaning just meant that there's things that you will to do, but your desire overcomes that will. And so Aristotle says, therefore, you see that what we have is the distinction between willing and desire. Because the person who is incontinent, who doesn't have self-control, wills or decides to not eat the coconut cream pie, but the desire gets the better of him. And so therefore, the willing and desiring are different, he says. Also, think about the various competing desires. How many of us, for example, have made promises that we go on to keep, but we didn't really want to keep them? Maybe we made a promise to go meet our friend at the gym at 5 in the morning, and it sounded great when we made the decision. And when you make a promise, you decide again beforehand to do this. But then the alarm rings. And the strongest desire is not to get up and go to the gym and meet my friend and keep the promise. No, I don't want to do that at all. I have the stronger desire to stay in bed and turn off the alarm or throw it against the wall. But often what we do is act against our desires. In other words, often we select against our desires and overcome the desire and do the thing that we don't desire. And so therefore, desire cannot be what proairesis is. It's not a kind of desire, since we often act according to the weaker desire. We select between desires, and the stronger desire doesn't always win out. Well, it's not a wish either. You might think that when I say I choose to do this, therefore I wish to do this. But he says wishing can't be it either, because we often wish for things that are impossible. Whereas what we choose is in our control. So I might wish that I could have eternal youth, but that's impossible. I don't choose to have eternal youth. And I might wish that my team wins, but I don't choose to have my team win, because to choose it implies that I have control over it. We choose things that are in our control. We wish for things in ways that are often impossible. So it can't be a wish. Well, perhaps it is an opinion, like a belief. But again, opinions are true or false, but willings are not true or false. Choices are not true or false. They're right or wrong, they're good or bad, but they're not true or false. And so again, opinions can't be it. So the question is, what is it that causes this choosing? Obviously, it is something that is distinguished from desire, wishing, and believing, but it is not something that doesn't involve these things at all. So in our next installment, we're going to go and see what his detailed analysis and definition of what it means to make a free choice.